Hello and welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. On this show, we talk about our childhood nostalgic dishes and we talk about what it's like to grow up Asian in America. I'm your host, Frisia Lee. Joining me as always is my husband, Sam.
Hello.
And our guest today is Neha Gautam, a filmmaker, photographer, and educator. Hi, Neha.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We're super excited.
Me too.
For listeners, a little backstory. Sam and Neha go way back.
Way, way back.
Yeah. Tell me how far back.
Oh man, now I'm going to feel old. I'm going to say the 90s, early 90s, high school. We met at Brooklyn Tech, a very large high school in Brooklyn. It's one of the specialized schools. So people tend to come from all parts of the city. So yeah, I think we had a lot of friends at other schools too. There's like Stuyvesant and Bronx Science. Brooklyn Tech is obviously known for specializing in like a few majors like engineering and sciences and things like that.
I love this because of our guests so far, like we've had a couple that are my high school friends and they sort of like predate my relationship with Sam. You're the first, aside from his sister, that predates me. And so after the show, I'm like, might ask you, what was he like when he was 15?
Oh, yeah, please do.
Probably in like a Jinko jean or something similar.
I was no. So Sam knew a good friend who's probably still one of my best friends named Berman. And Berman was a skateboarder. So I remember Sam in like Vans or something like that. And like, I don't know if Sam skated, but music was a big thing. We all connected over music and mixtapes. I believe I still have a mixtape. I was telling Sam this. I have a mixtape, a tape, like a cassette tape.
Yeah.
That he made for me. And I just remember that the writing was so, like, it was with a Sharpie and it was written so well. And he put so much thought in his mixtapes. Like they were named, they had titles, like, and I really appreciated that. And I think it even like inspired me to like put that level of care in my mixtapes because, mixtapes were a thing at that time.
It's weird because I think about it now and I realize that I've always kind of communicated or expressed myself through like weird technology. So if it's not like a podcast, then it's like mixtapes or, something like that.
This makes total sense.
I like that a cassette tape is technology in this instance, which it was, but thinking back on it. We haven't even like gotten into the food part of the show and I'm already like super into this, but let's do that.
Sure.
Neha, what is your childhood dish that is so nostalgic for you? Where were you eating it? Who was making it? Set the scene for us.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about this dish called paratha. It's similar to a roti, but a little bit different. It's thicker and it's made with a lot of ghee and it's like a layered bread. I mean, think roti that people are more familiar with, but parathas are layered, crispier, flakier, and you can stuff them with different ingredients. So my mother's side of the family were refugees from Pakistan who, during partition, fled to India. And my mother, I've actually, written a feature-length script about this, but my mother and father divorced when I was a baby and had a domestic dispute. And my mother came to New York after a dispute. It was actually the 84, the Olympics. The Olympics were in LA. And I think she got a visa to attend the Olympics. And meeting people now, I realized that event was a way that a lot of people got their visas. The Olympics in 84.
Really?
Yeah, because it was a way to say, hey, I'm going to the US, and they were granted visas. And I don't really know what happened. My mother was not an H-1 visa. I don't exactly know how she got citizenship. Like, it's a long story, but I lived in New York for a few years, moved a bunch, but the first memory I have with paratha was with my mother's mother, who in Hindi, like every person in the family has a title, like a different title. Like you would call your mother's mother a different title than your father's mother.
Mm-hmm.
So she was my nanny. So my nanny would babysit me while my mother was working. My mom was a single mom, and she would make parathas by hand. It's a type of bread you have to make by hand. And so there's a skill and a technique into making them that I just remember her doing at the counter. And she has her tools, she has her little rolling pin and marble kind of a circular kind of plate that she rolls them out on. And then a tawa, people usually make them on a different pan. So the pan is like a flat iron skillet, but completely flat. I don't know what it is about that kind of pan, but you need that pan. There's a lot of ghee, there's a lot of layering. And I do remember that as a child, I didn't really have a lot of connection to food. Like I remember my family, wanting me to eat and I wouldn't. Maybe it's because I was sick of Indian food. And at some point, my nanny said, okay, how about I make you Indian pizza? And so she would stuff the parathas with paneer, which is like a type of homemade cheese, and she'd put ketchup on them. And that was the only way I would eat, is just maybe I thought it was cooler than an Indian dish called paratha. I don't know, but if she said she would say, "Are you hungry?" And I would say no, and she would be like, "Well, do you want Indian pizza?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And I just thought it was cool, or I don't know, or it was okay. I don't remember it being amazingly tasty. It was just
How old were you?
just something I thought was cool. I was about 5, so that was a favorite. But it's funny because I was having this discussion with a friend who was Indian, and we talked about Indian pizza, and she said, "Hey, my family did the same thing to get me to eat." And I was like, that is so funny. Did they just know that we weren't gonna eat unless they westernized hybridize the name of this dish? Yeah, it's a funny relationship with paratha. But now I don't have a lot of family in New York anymore. Obviously, but yeah, I mean, Nani has passed away. My mother lives out of state. So these days I walk to a place that's close to me, and it's a Punjabi restaurant that I go to. And there's an auntie there, an elder, who is making breads by hand all day. And I will order a paratha because it's one of the places that you can get these types of paratha, and they're very hard to find on a menu. But yeah, you have to get them made by hand. I also connect them to a relationship with an elder, and it's usually the kitchen is a woman's domain, it's a woman's space. So there was when my mother was working full time, she would go to a place in Jackson Heights. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens, and there's a huge South Asian community. The communities there have been changing, but back in the day, there was a place that you could just buy rotis and parathas that were almost pretty much made. You just need to warm them up, and you could buy them in packets. So she would go there, and you'd see a group of women, and they would be making them, and you could buy them. But it was very popular with kind of IT workers and people that were moving to New York and wanted homemade food and couldn't get it easily, and they would just buy it for the week or whatever. It's something you want fresh. It's not something you want to buy too far in advance.
Right.
I think also, and I don't know about you all, but I think in my family, and I think this is an Asian cultural thing too. My family isn't very expressive with talking about their love, but they express their love through food. And so if my mom comes to visit me, she always asks me, "Do you want me to make you something?" And I realize that that's her way of saying this is what I'm going to offer you. Like, I
Yeah.
can't, this is what I can give you. And I usually ask for a type of paratha, and she'll ask me like what kind. And like I said, you can have them stuffed with different things. I usually get like, I ask for like a potato or a plain one.
You're not still asking for it with ketchup?
No, no more, no more of the ketchup. But I think there was like a transition or something that happened where that link to food being part of like your identity and like home, right? And not
Mm-hmm.
something that and also just like not having enough space from it to like miss it, where it wasn't like the same, it's not forced on me. It's just
Yeah.
something that I want, that is, that I'm missing all the time. And I heard this fact the other day and it was really interesting, but I think your olfactory senses are the sense that's most tied to memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes so much sense because there are these moments, and I don't know for you too, if there's certain smells that just like conjure a place or a space or a time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the smell of like rotis and the ghee frying and like flour and, that smell is really comforting and like nourishing when that space is not like accessible or those people no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of a way to remember the same feeling.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. I mean, you brought up so much in there and I love all of it, and we'll like circle back to a lot of those things. I'm curious, like, have you ever tried to make it yourself?
Oh, yeah. No. So I've made rotis. I've tried to make rotis. So this is a different story. Um, I know that a lot of women have a lot of trauma about, especially in like more conservative South Asian homes, about being like a good domesticated worker
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like how good their rotis are. So like how round they are. And my rotis were just like never round enough. But I've obviously like I didn't have a lot of experience. So my mother never made rotis. Only it was only my grandmother, and I asked her why. And I think they became a symbol of oppression for my mother because when my mother married my father's family was very conservative. And she ended up having to do a lot of the domestic labor in the house. And there were a lot of people in the house. So after she married in the house, she had to make like rotis for every meal. And I think, she's making rotis for like 10 people, 3 meals a day. I think she said something around like almost like 100 rotis a day.
Oh my God.
So I think when she separated from my father, she like kind of swore never to make them again. So, it was funny because she wouldn't make rotis. So I would always get them from my grandmother or she would buy them ready made. So I never wanted to be good at making them because I think I internalized like this story about her protesting, like, yeah, about this like
Yeah.
kind of desire for feminist resistance.
I mean, yes, actually, that reminds me of a guest that we had. She talked about how pre-made tortillas were like one of the single biggest impacts of feminism in Mexico because women were not just hand making tortillas all day long and like, making the masa and like smushing it down. And like that was their whole day. And when they could buy them, like it just freed up so much time.
Right.
And this sounds really similar. And also, I mean, I think there's so much there around like the role of women and mothers within a household. And like, what does that mean when you, particularly you, right, specifically are a generation removed, you get to like redefine your relationship to that. And also how the food sort of plays into that, I think is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, like for my experience and probably Sam's, like we don't cook a lot of Chinese food because like I've never needed to learn because we could just buy it, and my family sort of refused. Like my grandma grew up in a restaurant and then sort of refused to like cook Chinese food anymore.
Yeah. That agency is a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So my mother still does not make rotis, but parathas feel different. I don't know why, but she'll totally make them. But also, like you said about the tortilla, there was an automatic roti maker that was made in India, and people bought it. Like people, and I'm pretty sure they're used in a lot of establishments. But parathas are you can't make through a machine. Like it's not you can't get an automatic paratha
Mm,
because of the layering. It has to be you have to fold it
yeah.
and layer the ghee and if you add anything to it, so it has to come from someone hand making it.
A Western equivalent is maybe like croissant dough.
Yeah,
Just have to like layer and butter and layer and butter.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the flakiness is there. It's in the technique. You're gonna get a better paratha the more you work on it.
Does your resistance to making roti apply to like other dishes from your family and childhood, or is it just roti in particular?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it's just roti because I've learned how to cook Indian food. I make dal, I make rice and vegetable dishes. I think it's also like you need certain tools. You need the rolling pin and like the tawa, the skillet, the pan. So I haven't gotten the tools. Like when I make dal or lentils, they're different types of lentils. I just boil them, but my mother would always use what you call that, a pressure cooker. I think I tried to use a pressure cooker once and it like almost exploded in my face. So I got really scared of it. I should get one. I should. It's time. I'm just a little intimidated.
I'm guessing she used like the stovetop kind that are also could be weaponized and not like a very simple instant pot that you just are like,
Oh no. That was not. There was no Instant Pot. It was the ones that whistle.
maybe that's what you need.
Yeah, I needed Instant Pot.
Yeah.
I had a roommate that had one, and she said I could use it, but I didn't want to like mess it up. So I just take my time when I make it. I usually boil them for 40 minutes. I know if I like made it with the pressure cooker or the Instant Pot, it would take 15. But I'm okay. I'm okay with the length of time.
I'm curious to go back to paratha with paneer and ketchup, Indian pizza.
Yeah.
Do you know when you stopped eating it that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I left my mother's house. So after that, I lived with my father and my grandparents on my father's side. So I went between my parents. By that time, after I was like 7, my father was living in Alaska. So I lived with my father's father. That title is Dadi. So I lived with my Dadi, Dada, and he married a white woman, American woman. And that was my introduction to different foods and like less home cooked Indian food.
What was that like?
Alaska?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can't imagine living in Alaska, but also just the difference in food exposure.
Yeah, definitely different food. I moved in with my father's family, but I came back to New York every summer, and I think that was probably traumatic. Looking back, I'm like, yeah, that you were definitely traumatized, but kids adapt fast. So I was enrolled in school. Obviously, it's not as diverse as in New York. And because my step grandmother was American, there was a little bit of a loss of culture. And like, we spoke English. So I kind of lost some of my Hindi. I remember that she was kind of this grandmother, very old school, kind of like, you don't leave the table unless you finish all your food kind of parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was intense. But also, I realized at that time I didn't have much of a palate for things. And
Mm-hmm.
so she was like, okay, you're going to eat this. And I realized I must have just eaten a few things, which is why my grandmother probably came up with the Indian pizza, is that like the only things I would eat were pretty much like white bread, cheese, ketchup. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
simple, not very healthy things. So my grandfather cooked Indian food once in a while, or Punjabi food, dal and curries. I remember having potlucks at school. I don't know if this was a thing at your school, like on cultural days,
Oh man.
bringing in a dish. Was that a thing?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I remember bringing in chicken curry. And after that, the teachers and the staff would always want me to bring in chicken curry. They
Oh.
were like, "Can you bring in chicken curry?" My grandfather's chicken curry was like amazing. But like Indian food is so wide and vast and,
Yeah.
diverse. And I wanted to bring other things. And they were just like, "No, you're bringing in the chicken curry." And I got a little annoyed about like having it requested. I felt like I was flattened,
Yeah.
to being like associated with just one dish. We're not just chicken curry.
I mean, I feel like that persists still a little bit when people talk about Indian food, and this is like very broad strokes, but I feel like it's like chicken tikka masala and like
Mhm.
maybe a couple of other things. And then like after that, like people's knowledge just falls off entirely.
Yeah. Well, the chicken curries are even regional too, right? Like even curry like is a different recipe, village to village regionally, or just even by your family, like what the
Hmm.
ingredients they use in their curry might not be used in a different family's curry because it's really just a combination of a lot of different spices. But that definitely happens. And I honestly think it came from the staff and the teachers more than it did the other students,
Hmm.
because they weren't as bold, and I don't know, their palates are different. But what was your thing to bring at like the potluck?
I mean, I know they happened and I don't remember now at all, but also I was a vegan kid until I was
Mm.
9. So it would have been something vegan. And actually, what I remember more was like high school cultural days, in which it was just like whatever few cultural clubs would like go get something that you would then buy for like $1 or $2. And this is like different from yours, but that was always like the Chinese club had like chow mein, and then the Korean club
Mhm.
had, and it was just like always the same 3 things. And that was like their choice. But I think it like kind of resonates for me in the like flattening of a culture, because it was just like you knew the same 3, 4, 5 things that were going to be there. And that was like the one thing that, I mean, we're high school students, but it was like, well, there's other stuff too. Kind of similarly, like it's the things that if you asked like a white person, could you name a dish? It would be like that was the thing.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's part of like doing this show too, is just there's so much more out there. And I think that there's so much that we were like all eating at home or not eating and not knowing about, that we're just like trying to find the food stories and the stories that go with them about that, because
Mhm.
there's so much more than just what are like the 2, 3, 5 identifiable dishes to a white American or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so vast. It's limitless, really. I'm interested. So you said you were vegan until you were 9. Was your family vegan or?
My parents were vegan. Similar to you, my parents split up when I was pretty young, and my mom had grown up eating meat, but I guess she became vegetarian when she started dating my father, and he was vegan. So then I was vegan, and then they split up. She stayed vegetarian, and I stayed vegetarian for a while, or vegan for a while. And then my grandparents, who had always been meat eating and dairy consuming for Chinese people, wanted to take me on a trip. And my grandfather took me to Japan and Hong Kong. And he was like, I don't know how to travel with a vegan 8-year-old.
Yeah.
Can she please have dairy? And I did. And like, in a lot of ways, I'm like, actually, like Japan and Hong Kong are really easy places
Hmm.
to be vegan, but like he just didn't know that. And like, I think it was too much. And also, we would like go to, McDonald's Tokyo and get like pancakes or whatever, because he also just didn't know how to feed an 8-year-old, full stop. Um, and then the year after that, they wanted to take me to Europe, and it was like Norway, Sweden, like sort of that region of Europe. And they were like, how about meat also? Because eating in Europe as a vegetarian in, I don't know, this must have been like 1990 maybe, felt just insurmountable to them. So that's how I started eating meat.
Yeah, that's interesting. My nanny was actually vegetarian because of religion. She was Hindu, and she would eat only vegetarian food, but she would cook meat, but she would never taste it.
Hmm.
So she would get one of us to taste it, and she'd be like, "How is it? Doesn't need salt." Um, she made her decision, and she adapted to learn how to cook it, and because people wanted it and they requested it, and she didn't really push it on them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Who was requesting it?
her kids, I guess, my aunts and uncles. My mom wasn't vegetarian, but at some point in my teens, I became vegetarian. Um, yeah, I think when I started cooking. And I remember that was really hard for my mother because like she would always forget. And I wanted to be vegan because I realized I was becoming lactose intolerant, and there's a lot of dairy in Indian food, and it was just not making me feel very good. And maybe just because I had it was starting to cut it out so much. But I would always say, "Hey, I'm vegan," and she would cook things, and she would bring stuff with dairy, and I was like, "I told you I'm vegetarian," and she'd be like, "Oh, I forgot." I'm like, "Okay, well now I'm gonna feel sick," but she could just not, for the life of her, remember, or maybe want to remember, but it annoyed me so much. Um, Now she's a little better. She'll ask me, "Is it okay if I put this in it?" And I've also become a little bit more flexible when I'm traveling. Yeah, it's like my father's family, they ate meat. I guess it depends, like on religion too. Like my grandmother was Hindu. My dad's family, they were kind of all over the place. I do remember them eating beef, which is like not like a lot of Hindus don't eat beef. And then my mother, she ended up like having a Muslim boyfriend, and she stopped eating pork at some point, but she wasn't Muslim. But I think, yeah, she's still to this day she doesn't eat pork or beef, but she eats everything else.
I was going to say, she's like almost meeting you there, a vegetarian. Not quite.
Well, there's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of chicken. There's like lamb, goat, and other things.
It's funny that you say like she would just forget that you're a vegetarian and just like bring stuff anyway. Cause I feel like as we don't have teenage kids yet, but I could also see like a total mom flex to just be like, no. I say it sort of lightheartedly, and I don't think it's like necessarily meant to be disrespectful, but like I think there's a certain amount of mom of like, you'll grow out of this. So I'm just gonna like continue as if until you're done with this phase. And then of course, like it wasn't one and it stuck.
Yeah, I mean, like there were a lot of things my mom chose not to remember that I would tell her. But I think that was the vegetarian stuff was like really inconvenient for her. But I did buy my own like non-dairy milks and everything, in my teens, and I think I did influence her eating habits too. Another thing with paratha is it's a great breakfast. Like it's a wonderful thing to pair with chai. And my mom was addicted to chai. Like we don't say chai tea, it's just chai.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so she would have about maybe 4 or 5 cups a day. And I remember sometimes she would run out of milk because she would have to put milk in it. And I remember me being like, "Oh, there's oat milk or there's rice milk." And she's like, "No, like that's not gonna be the same." There were certain things she would not budge on. The milk was like, no, 2% all the way.
That's the non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable.
Going back to when you were living in Alaska, what were your lunches like? Like if you had an American grandma, was she also making your lunches? Was your dad making lunches?
She was totally making my lunches. And I had to make my lunches too after a while, but sandwiches, usually like mayonnaise sometimes a mustard, sometimes like a honey ham or something, sometimes like egg, sometimes peanut butter and jelly, sometimes peanut butter and banana.
Classic.
Yes. And always cut diagonally.
Yeah.
Diagonally in half. In a, not Ziploc, but the foldable
Oh, yes, yes.
sandwich bags.
I
Yeah.
remember those. Mm-hmm.
And usually like a snack, like a bag of chips or something, right? And then like a Capri Sun.
Classic.
Classic.
You just laid out like the iconic 90s, 80s, 90s kid lunch.
This was it. I don't even think it was like the fruit cup or anything. Yeah, no. But I do remember that a lot of time, like obviously, you know, eating this sandwich every day, you get kind of uninspired. So there were times where I wouldn't eat the sandwich. I know this is disgusting. I am disgusted by it, but I would leave it in my backpack and I would just forget that it was there. And there would like start to be a smell in the backpack. And I think I would have to do this weekly thing of like cleaning out my backpack and like fishing out sandwiches I didn't eat. That were in the brown paper bag that like started to smell a little funky, and turn different colors.
I mean, honestly, if we didn't clean out our kids' lunchboxes every day, we would absolutely be doing the same thing at the end of the week because they have no idea. They'll eat like half of a thing that they asked for and be like, "No, I forgot to eat lunch. I got distracted."
Yeah.
Were you ever just like, okay, but could I one time just get a thermos full of chicken curry? Or could I get a thermos full of dal? Like,
I wish I could. Well, my grandfather was like working all the time and he was not making the lunches. I think it was just like a hard thing to eat because it's something you want hot and we didn't have access to a microwave in elementary school. And yeah, I feel like if there was a way, I would have preferred that. Like I'm an educator and sometimes when I'm in schools, I see what people bring for lunch and I'm like inspired. I'm like, people really do it up. And I love it when I see like some rice and some this and, you know, some protein and vegetable. I'm like, okay. And they're like, oh yeah, you know, my mom packed this. You know, in India, there is this culture of like the lunchbox, but it's called the tiffin. It's like this like stainless steel lunchbox that workers get. Usually they would like pay for the month and then like they would be serviced a tiffin and the person collects them at the end and then washes them and like everyone gets the same thing. Usually like dal, a vegetable, and like some rotis or something, and they're stacked on top of each other. I do remember at one point I asked my mom to get me one, like a container, like a tiffin, because I just really liked the neatness and the compartmental. But and also you can use them as a dish, like you can eat with them.
yeah.
And I remember, like, we know sometimes when she goes to India for a wedding or whatever else, she's like, "Do you need anything?" And I remember a few times like asking her for things like this, like, "Give me back, bring me a tiffin." You can get them here, right? I mean, in Queens, there's a lot of like supply stores, but it's like they're ridiculously priced. You know, they're like $30, and like, why would I do that? There's also this container. I don't even know what it's called. I think I've heard a friend call it the circle box. It's just a masala container. It's just a circle. It's just like tiny cups that you put different spices in. And so growing up, I would always see my mom cooking with that. And when I tried to start cooking, she would kind of show me her box and she's like, we would put this and we put that. And nothing was in packages. It was just like you dump the spice in those stainless steel cups. Kind of like in this circular tray, and there's a tiny little metal spoon and you just scoop out the different spices, and she would know them by the smell and their color, like what was what. Obviously turmeric is like orange, chili is like red, there's a bunch of brown things, and that always like got me confused. But when I was like 18, 19, when I started cooking, I asked my mom to bring me one of my own. And that was kind of like a rite of passage, or it just felt like I was like becoming an adult.
Yeah.
And I still have one, the same one, and it's still in my kitchen.
Do you use it regularly?
I do use it. When I make Indian food, yeah. All the masalas I buy from the Indian grocery store, cumin. There's one masala, it's called garam masala, which is also a mix of other spices. And I could buy that at the store, but sometimes my mother just grinds a bunch of spices and makes her own. And she'll give me like a Ziploc bag full. And that feels like that extra little love, that just like step, where it's like a little fresher. But I remember I had this roommate for a while and he was an international student. And he was like, oh, yeah, my mom sent me with a bag of garam masala that she grinded, usually in like a coffee grinder, But yeah, that garam masala is like, your family's little loving touch in your dish.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that your mom sort of like shows her love and care through asking, what she could make you and making things and this garam masala and like sharing that with you. How do you receive that?
I receive it by being specific, by asking her for things that I do want. I saw you nod earlier when I said this, but like in Asian families and a lot of our families where we don't talk about the things that, the elephants in the room and that are hard, like love is communicated through food. And so I realized that she really wants me to want her food.
Oh, yeah.
I think as you move out and become more independent, as an adult, there's this kind of fear that we won't need our parents. I felt that fear, that my mother had that fear. And she kind of freaked out with that loss of being, I think she likes to be codependent. And so she would kind of ask, like, do you need me to cook for you? Do you need this? Do you want me to do your laundry? And I'd be like, no, I'm good. I didn't need it when I was like living with you. But I realized that when she's asking me that, she's saying like, this is the thing I want to provide. And so even if I don't want anything, I still will ask for something very specific. And sometimes my mom will say, I made you your thing, your favorite thing, which I don't really have favorite things. I have a lot of favorite things, but that's more of her need than mine, right? To feel like she's providing me something that I can't make for myself, that she knows that she has this like knowledge that I don't, right? That she can provide, which is a lot of times is food.
I think it kind of becomes like a double-edged sword when you're the sole domestic provider. Like you're used to making all these things and preparing all these things. And, if there's a lot of people in your family, then you're constantly doing this. And you don't really have time to, express your love in different ways because you're just like doing the work. So you become used to expressing your love in these sort of actions, right?
Definitely through food.
Totally.
I think my mom prides herself on like being a good cook. I know she does. I always tell people that are visiting my mom, or if my mom wants to make you dinner, you must eat, and you must eat a lot, and you must say yes to everything she's going to give you. If you want her to like you, I mean, you're going to like the food. That's not a question. But if you say something about liking the food, like that's all she wants, that acknowledgement. Like my friends were pretty diverse. I had a good friend growing up who was Puerto Rican and Ecuadorian, and she would come from Staten Island to eat at my house, especially when my mom made tandoori chicken, which is like marinated, and she would bake it in the oven. But yeah, like if I told my friends that she was cooking that, they loved it. I don't know. And she loved them loving it.
That's really funny because I just realized that when you're growing up in these kind of households where love is expressed in this way, you're used to receiving love in this way too. So I clearly remember also like going to my friends' houses when I was younger and like their parents making these meals, and like they were always kind of impressed by me because I'd be willing to eat the food and be like, oh, this is delicious.
Yeah.
Just because I think I grew up that way and was used to receiving food and love in that form. So it kind of just fit.
That makes sense. It's a language that you were, read in.
Yeah.
I think that they're surprised because we're open, right? Like we were open to trying. Where like I know that my mother, especially with Indian food, I think that there is some kind of stigma in certain surroundings or settings. Like I do remember her. My mother was in the 90s. She was an operator for AT&T. She spoke a lot of languages, and I remember her complaining that some of her coworkers were like complaining about the smell of her food when she warmed it up, and she took that really to heart. I mean, she was really offended, and rightfully so. And so I think when someone comes over and they're like open to trying or like curious, that's a form of acceptance too.
What came up for me was like, we talk about how it's really common to show love and to receive love through food, and we're all pretty used to it growing up. And I guess like as we get older and now as adults, and our own relationship to food has changed, and we are like much more aware of what our own personal sort of love languages are, I think it gets a lot more complicated, or like we have to do a lot more self-management when it comes to like, okay, she's making a food, or in my case, like bringing groceries or whatever. And I have to remind myself that that is how love is shown. That is like what is in our family traditions. And also is maybe still not the thing that like I necessarily prefer. And I just think that like it gets complicated as adults when we start to like, I don't know, find our own way. And then, maybe our family is not sort of coming along in the same way, and they're like in their traditions, which is fine. But now we are this generation that like has more awareness, and like how we kind of like navigate that going forward. And then for us, like what that means with our kids, and like having to sort of navigate that, like sometimes some people will show you love and affection and appreciation through food, and like not always. And it's okay that if that is not your thing too. And I wonder, like for you, especially being between your mom's house and your dad's house, and those like different spaces, like kind of how that has played into you as an adult and how you navigate that now.
That's a great question. Yeah, I definitely think I got some of that love language through my mother. I'll be like honest because I don't care. I'm from New York. So I'm dating, I'm on the apps. I'm very like communicative about like what I like, but I put on my app that one of my love languages is like cut fruit. Something about cut fruit, like that extra step of peeling and like cutting and putting a plate of fruit is just something like I love and love to do for people. And yeah, so I'm aware of that, and I definitely get that from my mother. My mother, she would ask me like, "Hey, are you hungry?" And I would say no, and she would still appear 5-10 minutes later with a plate of cut fruit and put it next to me without saying a word. And I wouldn't even be conscious of the fact that she did that, but then like be picking on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I told her I wasn't hungry, but I did want it. I don't know. Or it wasn't something bad. Like when I saw it, I wanted it. So I definitely love doing, and like if people come over, I will have that. Like at every gathering, I'll always have a plate of cut fruit.
So my mom, she's not like put a plate out, but her thing was always like she would cut my fruit for my lunch. She would like prep fruit and put it in the fridge for later. She would do it when we lived with my grandparents, and she would like peel and slice mangoes, and she would just be like, I peeled and sliced 5 mangoes and they're all in individual bowls and da 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 da. And I always thought that that was just like my mom doing the most and just like being super extra about it for any number of her reasons. But the more that like we have these conversations, and I think also Sam's dad, his love language is also cut fruit at the end of dinner that he puts out, and then everybody is like, oh my God, yes. The more I'm realizing that like my mom, it fits into this narrative that I didn't even really know existed. And so it's really like nice to hear that and to like hear your perspective on it too, and like what your experience was like, because now I find myself as a mom doing the same thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm just becoming my mom.
I know we all
which is fine. We all are, but like it also then makes me feel good about like, oh, I'm actually just part of this like collective culture that I didn't even know that she was sort of, within as well. So it makes me feel less like I'm just my mom and more that I'm Asian mom.
Yes.
Which I feel good about.
Oh, yes. I identify with the mangoes hard. That was a big thing, especially Alfonso mangoes. Still, I mean, we talk about mangoes, we go look at mangoes. I also remember going to India and eating different fruits for the first time, and my mom really being excited to share them with me. I think it's called sapadilla in different parts of Asia, but it's called chiku in India, and they have them in the Caribbean too. I just remember watching my mom eat them in India and being like, I love this. I miss this so much. And now me being super excited whenever I see something that's chiku, or like when I travel and I find them. But I recently found this amazing ice cream shop called Malai that has like South Asian ice cream flavors. They have like, saffron ice cream. They have rose and, different, they have like a roti and ghee
ice cream.
Yeah, ice cream. Yeah.
Ooh.
And they have like a chiku ice cream too. They do also have a mint cilantro kind of like a chutney sorbet.
Is this in Queens?
This is not. It's in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
But they have a few in Chelsea Piers, and they do distribute to other places too. But it's my favorite, and I've been trying to like get a date to go with me there, but it hasn't happened. So I've gone there. I've gone there with Berman, our mutual friend. And he has a son, and his son is not into it because the flavors are a little, I don't know, out there for him.
in time.
Yeah.
Damn, that sounds good.
I forgot what we were talking about, but yeah, the mangoes are a big thing. I spent some time in Jamaica. I was in a long distance relationship with someone in Jamaica, and a lot of the fruits in Jamaica are similar to the ones in India. And in Jamaica also has this history of having indentured Indian immigrants come as servants and bring a lot of culture and also different fruits and foods. That's how they got roti and curry, and I think that's how mango got to the Caribbean. And I remember finding out there were Indian mangoes in Jamaica, and like I took my mother to Jamaica, and I remember like there's different kinds of Indian mangoes in Jamaica. There's one that's the East Indian mango, and it's a very popular mango. And there's a Bombay mango, and there's a few other mangoes. They all have a different character and color and shape. But that was really exciting to share with her, and also like understand that there was like diasporic foods in places, to like share that.
How did your mother react to the mangoes in Jamaica?
She was excited. I mean, she was like, "Oh, this is good. This is," I think she was surprised, but I think she forgets. I think I was much more aware of it because I had been going to Jamaica over the course of many years. And so I had been meeting Indians living in Jamaica and kind of having these conversations. But also, I know we're talking about food, but so like growing up, I smoked weed as a teenager, and my mother was like, it was like the worst thing in the world. Like she was just always furious, and I'd always be in a huge amount of trouble. But I remember when we went to Jamaica and she saw the cannabis plant for the first time, I think it really had a big impact on her. My mother also has fibromyalgia, which is like a chronic pain, and it's hereditary, and I have it too. And I don't know what happened, but in the last few years, she lives in a state where it is legal, so you can grow it, a few plants, and she started to grow it, and she uses it for herself. It manages her pain and it helps her sleep. But I think seeing it in a field, I think just like growing as a plant had a huge effect on her. And I asked her about it because I think it's that whole thing, right? Like how our parents don't talk about things, where I'm just like, oh, okay, so now it's cool. Like I used to be grounded when you found it in my room, and now it's a medicine. Like, she's never going to have that conversation with me, right? Like, she's never going to apologize, which is fine. But like, I remember, sometimes she does bring it up, and I'm like, oh, so, she's like, yeah, I know I'm old, like I found it in my older years. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you're fine with it? And she's like, yeah. And then I'm like, it comes from India. Like, that even like ganja, which, what they say in Jamaica is a Hindi word. The Indians in diaspora brought ganja to Jamaica. And she was like, yeah, I know they use it in like ceremonies, bang, and like these different holidays in India. So I'm like, okay, you had this relationship with this plant where it was like a cultural plant, and then you chose to like, shame me for using it. And she was like, yeah, like your nanny one day, someone gave her the plant, like and she didn't really understand what it was. And she took it and she like fried it in the pakoras and she fed them to the family. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what happened? And she was like, nothing. We were just all laughing and laughing. And I'm like, okay, so you have this like beautiful memory of this thing. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? And you chose to like take on this, like internalizing that this was like a narcotic, like this,
Yeah.
and I was like so mad, but I realized that these associations change over time. And I don't know what happened. I mean, I think it was a mix of things going to Jamaica, but also like realizing she could grow it on her own. Now she's like gardening all the time. And I'm like, when did this happen? She was not like that, but like, I'm happy for her. And I'm also happy that it's not like something bad. And it's not, and she also has this connection, because I think like a lot of our ancestors, have this knowledge of subsistence, like farming and growing things to heal ourselves and to feed ourselves that we've lost. And so I'm really like excited that she's found that. And I think some of it is just like being around people who still do it.
Your mom got hit real hard with that DARE campaign in the 90s. It just really stuck.
It really did. I mean, they were on it too, the whole like gateway drug and da 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 da. But I'm glad she's over it.
I think, to be fair, and I wasn't there, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but, as a parent, for developmental reasons, maybe you don't want your kid smoking up too much, but, whatever.
Yeah, no, I get it. Totally. I'm glad we can share it.
This has been super interesting, Neha. I'm so glad that we had you here. I think we could honestly like do a whole show about mangoes, and maybe we should. And now I just really, really want a mango.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I want a mango too. Let's go get ourselves cut fruit today. Like, let's make that promise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can do this.
Everybody, listeners at home, cut yourself some fruit.
Yes.
Neha, this has been awesome. Where can people find you or your work online if they want to? Also, plug your short.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
Tell people about your short.
Thank you so much for having me and yeah, your support and like this platform. I am a filmmaker, and so I have a short that's in the festival circuit. It's called Passenger Seat. We have an Instagram, Passenger Seat Film, which is the handle on Instagram. And we are going to Seattle next week, and then we'll be in Vancouver for the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. I am also on Instagram, Resist and Rise, Resist and Rise. You can see some of my other work there. I also have a website. My name is Neha, Neha, Gautam, Gautam, NYC.com. Yeah, I am always going to be a storyteller and a visual storyteller. And so, just having these moments to even like share stories is lovely and like bringing back so many things. So thank you for this space. Yeah.
Congratulations on all the recognition that Passenger Seat is getting. And I just feel very excited for you and glad to see that your story is getting out there and people are seeing it.
Thank you so much, Sam. Yeah, that's really meaningful that you said that. It's a really personal story. It's based on a true story, and it's about a taxi cab driver and his relationship with his daughter. And I think art should come from a personal place, and so I think the best thing is kind of just like the community that I've been making around it. So it's been great, but also very exhausting. But mostly great. And like I said, to just like make community around these stories and find out that like a lot of us have overlapping struggles and like needs, and to other people too. I hope you keep creating your work, your art, whatever it is that you are working on. It's so important, especially living in diaspora, living as an immigrant, and sharing stories that are often marginalized.
Perfect. That's great. We will get links to all of your work up in our show notes and on our website. Listeners, you should go check out all of Neha's stuff, even the trailer to Passenger Seat film. It's so great. I'm really excited also. We will also try to get a recipe up for paratha, but I'm going to guess that it's not going to be as good as Neha's nani and, ketchup optional, we'll say. But thank you all for listening. This has been such a great conversation. We just couldn't be more pleased. And until next time, we will talk to y'all then. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.